Hey, everybody. Crimes of the future. What are they? What are these crimes? Is it growing your own unique human organs? Is it tattooing them and having them removed during public performance art? Is it eating plastic and living in a commune of secret plastic eaters? These are the questions that we consider as we discuss David Cronenberg's latest film, Crimes of the Future, starring Viggo Mortensen. Check it out. John?
Brian, how are you? I'm John.
Hello, John. I'm well. You know, there's no one else I want to be with.
Then who?
Than you. I only want to be with you.
A wise man once said that.
Yeah.
Was it Dr. Blowfish?
No, I think he was just Mr. Blowfish. I don't think he ever finished his degree. You know, one of my favorite directors, Sean, is David Cronenberg.
Oh yeah, Mr. Cronenberg. I'm a fan too.
Now, we handled one of his son's movies, right?
Yeah, we never took on the full gorilla.
Right. It's time to level up and face down Daddy Cronenberg.
Yeah, the maker.
There's a movie that he released in 2022, but apparently wrote and conceived of back in the early 2000s, 20 years ago or so.
That's quite the incubation period.
In fact, I have a little review here, a little quote. I'm quoting here. None of this, whatever he was just talking about in the review, is exactly new territory for Cronenberg. He actually wrote the script for Crimes of the Future more than 20 years ago, as I just said, but the movie never got off the ground until now. That may explain why the movie plays like a return to his career-long obsessions in films like The Fly and Crash, both of which examined how technology is literally reshaping the human body. In his 1983 horror classic Videodrome, the characters kept saying, quote, "Long live the new flesh," unquote, a grim mantra that's hard not to think about in Crimes of the Future whenever a scalpel touches skin. Yeah, so Videodrome, lots of opening of torsos and stomachs.
In the modern age, we get as close as technology touching skin, but he's looking more towards the integration of technology and skin.
Yeah, lots of body technology exploration in this movie. It's a very confusing movie if you've seen it. If you haven't seen it, it's very confusing. But maybe we can approach it thematically, and that will help structure our conversation better.
I agree. I think there's a narrative that is worth talking about, but you kind of have to nest this narrative in a global perspective as the world that Cronenberg makes.
So can we list a few high-level themes that this movie touches on?
If you think about the high-level themes, there's the option for the story to go in many different directions. Mr. Cronenberg chose a direction, his direction, but there's a world that could be populated in many different ways. So starting at the global themes, there is no pain. The only pain that is felt is in dreams, and a few individuals do experience pain. For whatever reason, pain has become, I wouldn't say obsolete, but some might say that in the story, but non-existent.
Why is it that no one in the story feels pain in the movie? Is it because of everyone's just taking drugs all the time?
I think that brings me into the second bullet point here.
Wow. Not even going to answer my question.
I don't think it's answered in the movie. It's a good question. I don't have the answer. Hyperevolution seems to be a thing. There's a theme of new organisms being made from humans in a very rapid way. You could call it an evolution. You call it sort of a modification, but there's a neutrality related to evolution that may not be apparent in the term. So I think that people, when they hear evolution, it's described as something getting better. But I'm suggesting it's not that something's getting better. It's that it's modifying itself to the climate in which it's operating in. There's no positive or negative to it. It's just evolving. It's changing.
Okay.
Humans are changing rapidly into organisms that become categorically non-human.
Got it. So no pain, evolution beyond normal human borders.
And no infection. There's no ability for the body to become infected by bacteria. I'm guessing viruses. There's no concern about open wounds and gangrene.
Another I don't know if it is at this altitude thematically, but what is art seems to be a question that this movie wants to talk about.
Let's start with the 20,000 feet. That's the events that are happening globally, and then maybe we're moving down into the events that are happening socially or within large social arenas. Can you repeat that again?
What is art?
Yeah. What is art?
Yeah.
It's a discussion that we've had here on this podcast.
Several times, actually. There's also a lot of sexual activities, but in this future, it's not traditional sex, it's surgery. Surgery is the new sex, they say.
Yeah, so if you start at the global theme that there is no pain, then as social beings, there's a evolution, you could say, towards people having sex through body penetration or body modification that isn't a traditional sexual encounter.
Yeah, and there's, just to illustrate what we mean, there's scenes in the movie, alleyways, back alleys, where a man is crouched down next to a woman, and instead of a normal, traditional sexual act that one might perform in a back alley, the man is just cutting into the woman with a knife in a way that causes pleasure. So just, very, very different ideas of what sex might look like in this Cronenbergian future.
Right. Street surgeries. Just to bring in some clinical observations here of things that were mentioned based on these new social dynamics. I heard the word evolutionary derangement. How that classifies, I'm not sure.
That's 2 words, actually. Well, maybe something else to tie that to is this movie is also a whodunit, kind of there's a cop investigative detective angle to it too, and he wants to, that the detectives and the vice unit that he leads wants to stop these hyper evolutionary activities. I think
it's possible. It's possible. And another sort of clinical term, accelerated evolution syndrome.
Wow.
Yeah.
AES.
Yeah, AES. It's a thing.
Yeah. I would lump that under hyperevolution, and maybe I guess there's a narrative element of a detective story.
And then one last little feature here that I think is worth highlighting is the chocolate bars that are in this movie, the purple chocolate bars.
They look delicious.
They did look delicious. My understanding of them are it's a distilled down chemical that those who have evolved into, I guess, post-human, neo-human organisms, they can eat this product and survive. In fact, they find it like a Cliff Bar, like something they just snack on. And it appears to be made of toxic chemicals within a plastic compound or a plastic chemical, sister to chemical. Yeah, so this is almost a litmus test that is provided for those who are trying to figure out if they are part of this new human race. And if you're not part of it, then it will kill you.
Well, my understanding was that the people who ate the purple chocolate bars made of plastic had received an operation that installed the necessary digestive gear into their bodies willingly, presumably, and they all live in a little commune. I think they're politically motivated and environmentally motivated because they're obviously recycling and making use and ridding the world of some of this environmental plastic pollution. So it was kind of a political statement, sort of environmentalism taken to such a point that they're willing to have this operation to be able to eat these plastic bars. I don't really understand. I don't know. We can still talk about the themes, but I wasn't sure as a viewer where the tension in this movie was really meant to lie. The plot, I didn't feel like had a lot of tension, but I guess that's a potential point of tension in the movie, this underground political plastic consuming splinter group. But I wasn't sure why they represent a danger, if it's the vice cop who's after them, or if the vice cop is more interested in this underground street performance art stuff that's going on, or if those are somehow related. I don't know if you have any insight on some of those questions.
These are good questions. I think you've sort of gotten sucked into the narrative, the quicksand of that narrative that is so alluring to step into, yet is quite complex and confusing. I didn't realize that the people that ate the plastic bars were engineered to eat plastic bars. I thought that they progressed to eat plastic. That's an interesting, and don't forgive me. I think anyone who's seen this movie might miss a few of these details.
Well, like I said, I could be wrong, but I think there's a scene where the head guy, Lang Dotrice, the guy who killed his son, or whose wife killed their son, there was a scene where he was introducing, I'm not sure who, maybe it was Saul Tenser. He was showing him around the little commune where they made the chocolate bars, the little underground place, and he had one of his buddies show Saul his own scars on the abdomen where he had the surgery. And I think the unique thing about their son, Brecken, the kid that got murdered at the very beginning, the unique thing about him was that the plastic digesting ability was magically passed down genetically, and that was what made him so extraordinary. Everyone else in the commune had the operation done so that they could digest plastic, and somehow, and I can rant later about why the movie threw a bone at that problem, but didn't really satisfy me. Acquired characteristics are not passed on genetically.
I know, it's your favorite argument.
That's my favorite argument, and I give credit to the movie because there was a moment where they zoomed in on Saul Tenser, and he's like, "Are you saying that it violated evolution and an acquired characteristic was passed on genetically?" And
good Tenser, by the way, is good Tenser. The impression was
because
he has this sort of Batman
coffin. So I was like, okay, I was kind of sitting up and clapping at that point because they were actually acknowledging this understanding of genetics, but then they were just like, well, it must be a miracle, and they just kind of glossed on and went on with it.
We can dive into that. I do have a comment on that as well. Jeez, I don't want to miss that opportunity. Let's just go ahead and talk about that now. So the example that was given was that if you cut your finger off, and you have a child, that child will have a finger. That what I do to my body has no reference to what I pass on genetically. I want to push into this a little bit because, as this topic has come up, we've not necessarily disagreed, but there's a thread there that's worth describing just to bring a little bit more, make it a little more dynamic, is that there's kind of an idea of genetic trauma that's passed on, that's being kind of studied and reviewed, where it's not something that was genetically gifted to me. It was an experience I had that I passed on to someone else. So just to divide this away from me cutting off my finger. If I cut off my finger, that obviously is not going to be transmitted. But there's an idea that certain experiences can be so significant that they may change some aspects of traits that are passed on outside of a pure DNA type product. And so one of them happens to be within the trauma category, where they've studied people who have had very traumatic experiences, say, for instance, in the Holocaust, and how those may or may not have been transmitted to their children. The other animal study, which is cited often, is you have a mouse who is subjected to a chemical, a scent, a perfume, let's say, and at the point of which that perfume is introduced, they're shocked. Then after that, they have little mouse babies under conditions that are isolated from the mother. That same chemical scent is introduced, and the mice react as if they're going to be shocked. So there's some studies in that realm that suggest significant traumatic things that happen to a human can alter DNA that could be passed on. Maybe it's unnecessary to make that point. It's not introduced in this movie. This movie is purely a biological evolution, but I just want to throw that out there to kind of churn up that as a concept.
Don't know anything about those studies. I feel like the movie at the end lost me a little bit when Caprice, Saul Tenser's partner, took more initiative, and she had that facial scarring made, and I felt like that was a turning point for her character in a way I didn't really understand. But she wanted to perform the autopsy on Brecken, the small boy, and she has a dialogue, a soliloquy to the audience as she's doing that towards the end of the film that I didn't really understand, because it seemed to be an accusation against Saul Tenser in a way, who was up there on the mezzanine operating the machinery of the autopsy machine. Did you make any sense of that? She sort of long eye contact and ranting about inner beauty and outer beauty, and I really don't know what that scene was about. But in the end, Saul winds up eating plastic and sort of
the plastic bar.
the plastic bar, and there's a sense, I think, that he was one of them all along. I just don't know how it all wraps up.
Well, this is why I'm here with you, Brian, is to hold your hand. Together, we will navigate these complexities. I don't have a clear answer on that. I know that at one point, Caprice said after watching what appeared to be a supermodel of sense, someone who's known for her physical beauty, have her face mutilated or cut open. And Caprice was saying she has a desire to be open metaphorically, emotionally, artistically. So there's this melding of her and her body and maybe a pushback against social norms to where she can just be her true self. And I don't know if her speech aligned with that because I don't remember the context of that speech, but that was the thread of her character that I felt she was representing, this sort of, I'm trying to be fully authentic, fully artistic. I want to be open to all aspects of existence and feeling, and my body is a vehicle for that, but I'm willing to sacrifice my body for that. And when seeing a supermodel, in a sense, sacrifice her beauty for a experience and a disruption, this sort of idea of which they were referring to at the final event, this inner beauty pageant. Part of this movie, and I couldn't tell where it landed, is, was it trying to be funny? Like, was there some level of like literal, like navel gazing going on here where people are so interested in themselves and sort of pretentiousness and sort of vapidness where they're looking at themselves and their body to the point that performance art has become the thing that people are just so focused on. And it's like an egotistical piece, maybe. I don't know. There were some points in the movie where I was kind of laughing and I couldn't tell if it was trying to be kind of funny or if it was 100% serious all the way through.
I came across a review that I'll read here kind of about that same theme. This is a quote. One of the funnier things about Crimes of the Future is that it plays like a deadpan satire of the modern art world in which Saul and Caprice must contend with rivals, fans, and even groupies, unquote. So yeah, I think there's something there that's meant to be humorous about the art world and its pretensions. And I particularly remember when Saul and Caprice were doing, or when anyone, the ear dancer guy, for example, and others were doing their performances, there was always a ring of viewers, filming and taking snapshots. And I felt like that was a bit of a jest at how serious the art world or artists or art connoisseurs might take themselves. And there's one other quote too, but I wanted to say something first about why I brought up that you were talking about whether evolution and acquired traits acquired during our lifetimes, and how that played into the kid Brecken. But the reason I brought up that end scene with Caprice doing the autopsy is because the Brecken's organs were tattooed. I thought that was somehow a suggestion that they had been planted there. Either
Yes.
So did little Brecken have the surgery after all, and Dad was just lying about the supposed miracle of the evolutionary transfer?
Right. So this is where we get into the confusing aspect of discussing or describing this process, is that my understanding is that the reason why at the very end the father has his head drilled in is because it's discovered that he's misrepresenting that child as being the birth of a son with a chopped off finger, let's say, as the example gives. That I chopped off my finger, aka I installed a new plastic consuming stomach, and then I had a kid. Oh, and my kid has a plastic consuming stomach. But what actually happened was that the father installed fake plastic stomachs because the organs were tattooed, which part of the reason why, and that's just a guess because it wasn't fully explained. It's a little obnoxious why he would bother tattooing the organs, because they introduced the bureaucrats, the ones that work at the organ registry department. It felt like the tattooing was another part of the art, but it also kind of felt like it was a way of inventorying these organs. Either way, why would the father have tattooed organs installed in his kid and then ask for an autopsy, which would then reveal him as the one that installed the organs, unless he paid someone to do it and he didn't know that the organs were tattooed. And then when the kid was opened up, he was like, oh crap. The guy I paid to install these organs used tattooed organs, FML. You know what that means?
I do. It's a future thing, right?
And so, and then he kind of escapes and then puts on a sob story, which was not very convincing, and then had his head drilled.
What was the sob story about? Why was he so upset on the staircase?
And so those that are listening, if you haven't seen the movie, you're going to be completely confused with our description because it's bouncing around a lot. So he was on the steps crying and suggesting that the mother installed those organs and he didn't. And then those two women who were investigators of some sort were like, oh, we don't believe you. We're going to kill you because we know you installed the organs.
Why would the mother, I don't know if you can answer this, but I'm just trying to make sense of it. Why would the mother have installed organs that allowed him to digest plastic and then turned around and murdered him because he was such a plastic eating monstrosity?
Exactly. She didn't. That was the reason why he got his head drilled. She admitted to the murder because she suffocated him and did it with purpose and admitted to it in a very pure way. He, the father, is the one that installed the organs, and that's why those two women came up and drilled him in his head.
The two women that did the murder, Router and Burst, they work for the company that makes these devices, Life Formware, and they originally had come to Saul Tenser's place to work on his hanging bed or his breakfast or chair or his autopsy module. I don't remember which one. They represent a corporation that sells these devices. What is their motivation to kill Lang Dotrice, the head of the plastic digesting commune? I don't understand why they want to kill him.
I don't understand that fully either. My guess is that they are misrepresenting themselves as manufacturers of that product, or maybe they were former manufacturers of that product, the machines that are used for digestion and pain management when sleeping. And now their motivations are uncovering or bringing to light the fraudulent activities of the plastic chocolate bar makers.
I have a quote here from a review that makes me feel better about my confusion. Quoting here, on the whole, the effort to make heads or tails of the philosophies that are at the heart of this movie is a laborious one. Amid a crowded canvas of players, among them are Scott Speedman's enigmatic leader, and that's the Lang Dotrice, and a memorable Welket Bungwe, he's the detective, a complicated detective, and open-ended ideas unsure of what to do with themselves. Yes, this operatic science fiction is filled with vague, half-finished stabs at the notions of evolution, societal disorder, and the tragedy that is the vanishing of environmental ecosystems, the ultimate crime committed by mankind. Still, it is nothing short of overwhelming to ponder these queries amid a parade of eye-popping body horror, from stitched lips and eyes to ears growing out of every inch of one's body. It's not exactly revolutionary and more alarming than scary, but it's still provocatively feverish stuff from the dearly missed vintage annals of Cronenberg, unquote. So just a couple of phrases that I liked from that review. Operatic science fiction, vague, half-finished stabs at some philosophical notions, and nothing short of overwhelming to ponder these queries amid a parade of eye-popping body horror.
Eye-popping.
Because, yeah, I mean, I like all the ideas, evolution, environmental degradation, but ultimately, like I said before, I didn't really understand the tension. I didn't understand the motivations of... I didn't know who the organ registry people were. The guy and his little assistant, Timlin. I didn't understand them at all. I didn't understand what the detective was after. I don't understand why surgery is so pleasurable. I don't feel like they really went into that. Because we feel no pain and because there's no infections, why do we suddenly want to cut into each other? How on earth is that replacing sex? Just lots of kind of neat little bubbles of ideas that didn't really... That fit together. Somehow this movie hung together in a weird way, but I still didn't really understand where the fundamental narrative tension was.
I'm going to give some space to the idea that one can have a sexual experience across all parts of their body outside of their genitalia. So, there's a kind of an idea that neurology is entirely based in your brain. There's more neurons in your body overall than in your brain itself. So the body itself is a receptor of neurology. There is an idea that one could have an orgasm without any stimulation to their genitalia, but that fully replacing traditional sex seems a little strange. I mean, a good example might be when you have a Q-tip and you put it in your ear and then you spin it around and it feels really good. I mean, I don't know why that would feel good, but it does. Not to the point at which, like, I have a sexual experience when that happens, but there's parts of the body that can be stimulating in ways that maybe aren't fully erotic, but are pleasurable. And so the idea that one could find a sexual experience outside of traditional one, okay, give space for it, but to replace it fully and fundamentally seems odd to me, especially if pain receptors are no longer working or are functional. Then it would seem like an orgasm would be even more interesting and have more drive because it's the only place in which I feel high levels of sensation. That one part, there's some space for it, but it also, I think the fact that everyone's transitioning to that style seems a little odd.
Saul Tenser grows these organs, and he's unique because his organ growths are novel. He's actually producing unseen new organs, human organs,
by will alone.
Yeah, exactly. And then Caprice adds to them by tattooing them. Mm-hmm. And then he wants to have them removed because I guess they can sort of build up and cause harmful effects if left untreated. So that's what their art is. He grows the organs, completely new stuff. She tattoos them. She somehow adds beauty to them by internally tattooing them. And then together they do this performance where they are removed. That seems like their artistic angle. I don't see how sex or arousal or sexual pleasure or orgasm ties into that. Those seem to be two different things. Everybody's in the back alleys cutting each other up because it seems to just be what's happening now between lovers instead of sex. But their thing, Saul and Caprice's thing, I didn't feel like was connected to sex. But then it is later when she kind of, there's a scene where he cuts into her and then she's having sexual pleasures thereby. So I didn't feel like the surgery being the new sex thing really made any sense. I didn't feel like it really added much to the movie. I don't know. There's that little Timlin, the assistant in the National Organ Registry, who gets very attracted to Saul, but the surgery is the new sex thing. I didn't think added much to the movie personally.
Sure. Okay, so that's one of the big things that I think is global that I'm glad that we discussed that as our individual preferences go. The other thing that seems to be a big driving force is that everyone wants to be a performance artist. Mm-hmm. So Tenser and Caprice have become these massive celebrities, although the shows that they go to aren't really heavily attended. So I don't know what their followings are.
Well, I think they're also they're intentionally hiding their performance art. I think because they're being hunted by this vice unit that doesn't want this organ growth and this hyperevolution to be happening.
Okay,
so I think it's all underground.
Fair enough, but broadly speaking, it seemed like the idea of being a performance artist is what everyone wants to do. It's like the Instagram pursuit that seems to be popular now. And I don't know if that was a nod to that, but just bringing in a global social pressure, that's the place people want to be. And when the performer with all the ears was dancing around, one of the critics, or maybe it was the curator, was giving him a hard time saying, yeah, the ears, they're a bit much. They're not even functional. The ears are secondary to just his dancing, kind of like underestimating him. So this idea of being able to produce something biologically and performing that, or mutilating my body and performing that, some performance artist aspect is like the big social push. Everyone wants to do it.
If in that is a critique of exhibitionism, broadly defined, by which I would, our obsession with social media and Instagram and curating these stories and images of our own idealized daily lives. If a critique of that is meant by the underground, hyper sort of violent surgeries and stitchings and mutilation of the body, if that's meant as a criticism of that, I would happily welcome it, but I didn't really feel it. Because that one scene with the ear guy dancing, yeah, that was kind of a one-off in that regard, I guess. I don't remember any other scenes where these performance artists were mocked for not being original. And maybe to pair with that, I did find Saul and Caprice's relationship to be very endearing, and I liked both of their characters. I liked how completely honest they were to each other, and they were just like straight up about how they felt and what they wanted, but also very supportive of each other and just very honest and maybe in that sense good artists, because they were just always saying yes to whatever was happening and kind of trying to make it beautiful and trying to make it work. And several reviews mention this too. I'll read one here. Quoting here, the story morphs into a noirish, like a film noir detective, I think. The story morphs into a noirish mystery, complete with a nosy detective and a couple of powered drill-wielding femme fatales. The movie's also a bizarrely touching love story, and both Mortensen and Seydoux, the two actors, suggest a deep core of passion beneath their characters' clinical exchanges. Yeah, so just a couple of my reviews mentioned kind of the warmth, I guess, is how I would characterize it, of that couple's relationship. And I think without that, the movie would have been much harder to watch, because I did like the two main characters and what they had going together.
Okay, fair. So you're highlighting that relationship as being something that you found attachable to the movie.
It was authentic. If these other performance artists are inauthentic, theirs was authentic while also being extremely avant-garde and what everyone else wanted to emulate. It was authentic. It was, in that sense, artistically valid.
Sure. I would say that the thing that I attached to in the movie was the culture of going to an art exhibit precisely around a performance art exhibit. I used to go to a lot of art events, and I went to one where a guy performed a self-circumcision on stage and then took his foreskin and shoved it into a hole in the wall. And so that was, I guess, worth watching, but kind of brutal. Point being is that I remember the sort of element that one feels in these situations, I think, was mirrored in the movie, where there's an anticipatory event of, I don't know what I'm going to witness. I could witness something amazing. I'm definitely going to witness something. I'm in a small space, much like they were in most of the performance art spaces. So I'm going to see something amazing. I'm going to see something exclusively amazing. And then after it happens, as the critic, it was kind of mirrored in that character who was talking about the ear performer. I take that experience and own it, and I can be critical of it and either internalize it and identify with it, or I can reject it and say, oh, this is trite. Like, this is done before. This is of low quality. I can be the evaluator. I don't know if that's the attraction to events like this or art in general as a critic. But again, seeing something possibly amazing to a small audience and then having the power to evaluate whether it was good or not, and then leave with this unique experience that I have deemed whether it was of value. And so that was kind of the element that was going on, I feel, within the art spaces. I got a sense of attachment to that part of the movie.
Another thing we haven't really talked about is Saul himself. He experiences a lot of pain, I think, because of all this novel organ growth, I guess. He has difficulties eating and sleeping and requires special bed and chair to help him do that. Do I have that right? Or was he, and all the rasping when he speaks and coughing, he was pretty much permanently sick because of this excess organ growth?
Yeah, I wasn't sure if he was fitting into the accelerated evolution syndrome category, because they kind of threw out some words there fairly quickly. And so it appeared that he was a uniquely talented or positioned person genetically to produce these organs that he was willing to produce. Maybe he was on that sort of cusp between old human and new human, where he's still kind of feeling pain, which is kind of an artifact of an older generation, yet he's producing new organs, which is the direction that the new human body is going in. So he's kind of at that intersection point is kind of what I got from it.
And it's a total secret to Caprice that he is informing. He's an informant for the detective, correct? And what do you have a sense of what his motivations are for being an informant?
That motivation was lost on me. I'm not sure why he was bothering with that. I've no clue.
At the end, I got the impression when he ate the plastic, and I think he had associations with Lang Dautrice, the head of the commune, plastic devouring commune. So I couldn't tell if he was already a member of that commune. He's informing on the underground art world, and he's helping to lead those two assassins. They assassinate the head of that clinic, that company, and then maybe he also leads them, the two assassins, to Lang Dautrice when they get him on the stairway. Was he always a member of the plastic eating group, or did he just discover that his body had authentically grown organs that could digest plastic, and therefore he was some kind of natural member of this group? Yeah, I just didn't. It didn't make sense to me.
Part of the reason why I kind of wanted to pull apart the different large sections of the movie is because I think that clouded my experience when trying to pull apart what was realistic and what was a good movie and what was just a mass of information which I was trying to digest. With Tenser, he, near maybe the last third of the movie, he's just randomly running into major characters in the movie without any reason. So he'd be walking down the street, and then one major character would just be on the street and approach him. When he was talking to the government stiffs, he just kind of came in the office, and one happened to be there, and then the other one happened to be in the other room, just coincidentally. And when he went to get his zipper installed in his stomach, he showed up for a completely different reason than the zipper install. He just happened to show up. Oh, you're here for that? I didn't know you were here for that. I was expecting you for something different. So there's this sort of like stumbling experience where conveniently the main character is pushed into different elements to move the plot along quite quickly, actually. If the movie wasn't so complex and you weren't trying to figure out what the hell's going on, I don't think people would tolerate that as a believable plot device. Yeah. I don't know. I don't know what your feelings on that were.
Yeah, he's, I don't know, some kind of omniscient, not a narrator, but some kind of omniscient character. He unites all the different actors in the movie, all the different agents in some way. He's connected with everybody, I think.
It moves the plot, but there was no reason why he would be connected. That was the part that kind of bothered me. It's not like they had a place in which they would naturally intersect. He just stumbled into them.
Yeah, and why is he always veiled and cloaked and dressed in black? And I felt like that was supposed to mean something, but I didn't. There's a scene, I think, where he kind of makes a joke about it, where somebody offers to take his coat, and he's like, I'd rather leave it on. So, I mean, I don't know if his clothing, Caprice dressed normally, and as far as I can remember, everyone else dressed normally, but he just walked around in a long black, even his sleeves covered every piece of him, and sometimes he would even veil his face and sometimes not. So I don't know if that was to maybe cover his scars, or maybe he had weird protrusions from all this organ growth, but I don't know if that clothing somehow is meant to inform us about his ubiquity as a connecting character. I don't know.
One complaint I have is that, and this is kind of front-loading this complaint. You're familiar with SETI as a scientific investigation into extraterrestrial life?
I am, yes.
Yeah, so it's basically this idea that we'll point radio telescopes to the skies and scan the skies in the hopes that we'd pick up a radio transmission, and then that would confirm that there's extraterrestrial life. One tenet, to my understanding, why this is decided upon is there's an idea that any organism that has the potential to evolve vision through, being close enough to the sun, so there's enough sun coming in that I evolve eyes as a main element to navigate the world, would then at some point, if you keep them on a continual timetable, invent radio technology. I don't know exactly why they believe this to be the case, but it's almost assumed that if this, then that. And eventually you'll stumble into inventing radio technology. Therefore, this is the signal that we assume that we'll look for. that window is actually fairly small because when you go into digital technology, it's not as detectable in the same way that radio technology is. So maybe there's a secondary reason is because it's the only way one could detect a long distance analog signal. This example has been used only to discuss that the environment in which Cronenberg builds these movies, I find a little obnoxious, where people are using 90s camcorders with 80s TVs, and they're living in what look like carved out, I don't know what era it would be, but it feels like maybe like 1800s, kind of these buildings that are just made out of pure stone, shaped stone. So maybe, kind of maybe later in that era. But anyways, I just find that distracting. I don't know if it's because I'm not tolerant enough to the possibilities of the world. But, with that SETI example, I feel like things evolve in a certain pattern. And if this, then that. And if I've created a camcorder, why am I living in a stone hut? And so that bothered me. I don't know if that had any effect on you whatsoever.
I guess I kind of glossed over that, but you're right. Yeah, the little Ring camera that Caprice uses, for example, the footage that produces looked, grainy. But I guess I thought that was meant for artistic effect, the footage being grainy and kind of black and white.
Yeah, I'm sort of comparing architecture, technology, and then even with this idea of fast evolving bio.
Yeah.
And I've invented this chair, which through its biological effects, I can mediate both pain and digestion. So it's like if you take these 4 or 5 different threads and put them right near each other, it seems like one wouldn't just be totally abandoned in technology pursuit as the other one's hyper focused on. There's a general push forward in all these areas. So, I think he was just kind of doing it to make the scene interesting, but it kind of pulled me out of the possibility of said such future. Last piece that bothered me was, I don't understand the title, Crimes of the Future. Do you have a hypothesis on why he chose that title?
I'm not sure, but the only crime that I think the movie references is unregistered novel organ growth. So when and I don't know if everyone's growing novel organs or whether it's just Saul Tenser, he's being responsible. Caprice and he, I believe, register every one of his new organs at the National Organ Registry. And
as one should for those listening.
All you organ growers. So at the same time, the National Organ Registry is like top secret, and they're super worried about being discovered. So I don't know. They don't seem to be on the side of the government or law and order either. The detective never makes any arrests. There's not even a scene where he's in the police unit. He's always just meeting Saul Tenser out next to a rusted old ship or something. So yeah, no, I don't have an answer to that. Crimes of the Future. Something about growing beyond the acceptable boundaries of what it means to be human seems to me to be the only possible crime, but it's unclear. That's why the plastic eaters, I think, have to live hidden lives and so on. But there's no sort of Orwellian governmental body in this movie or punitive measures taken by Detective Cope or anything along those lines that would suggest punishment.
Well,
yeah, I don't know how I feel about this movie. It's good Cronenberg. It's got its interactions with the human body and technology. This movie was well received. It was debuted at the Cannes Film Festival, and well thought of, I believe.
Mm-hmm. No, it was. And it wasn't an easy movie to just fall into. You know what I'm saying? You kind of had to pay attention the entire time. And that's kind of where I felt like there was permission to make plot holes and permission to skip narration or plot development that would typically be unbelievable because there's so much stuff going on. I was kind of half thinking, is this a joke? Is he in on this joke, or is he making a movie that is unaware? I kind of balanced that a few times, and I will move into the concept that he had an inside joke in the process as well, kind of making fun of himself or making fun of just the art scene in general. So I'll accept that. But yeah, it was a process in viewing, I guess.
there's just some of my feelings. Like each scene I thought was interesting in and of itself. Like every scene had an atmosphere and I thought really good acting, especially Kristen Stewart, I think was her name, the lady who played Timlin. That character was just so well done, and all of her eroticism and subversion and stuff, and like I said, the relationship between Saul and Caprice, and I felt like every scene was stood on its own in some way as an episode, and as a every scene had a good vibe, and sometimes a very different vibe. And like you said, there were elements of comedy throughout, and this detective thing, and environmentalism, and sex, and art, and just way too much philosophical directions to really be coherent. So, maybe cool in a sense of but not in a coherent sense. Every scene was cool and interesting, but like for different reasons that didn't all really ultimately hang together or amount to much of a statement. I would say, I would accuse. I had to watch it with the subtitles on, and that really helped a lot. And I also sat in a special chair that would sort of whack me and helped my body to understand the movie better. I don't know if you have such a chair, but I would recommend one.
Right. No. I had watched the movie and then immediately ate a dark chocolate bar, vomited, and then fell asleep. So
I had just eaten a trash can, so I felt pretty full actually at that point. So yeah.
Well, I think we're going to have to move back into this hike. As much as I enjoy these conversations with you, we do have a mountain to climb,
We do, and unfortunately, just with the organs that normal, run-of-the-mill, milquetoast human evolution has given us.
Yeah. Till next time.